Little Nightmares 3 was one of my most anticipated games, but after finishing it, I was left feeling extremely disappointed. Despite having some interesting ideas in the Little Nightmare aesthetic that we're so used to, this third entry failed to live up to its predecessors in almost every way. In this video, I'll break down why Little Nightmares 3, in my opinion, is a huge letdown, from its shortened length and weak story to its lackluster scares and co-op feature. Little Nightmares 2 set a high bar, arguably the best in the series, and Little Nightmares 3 had some very difficult shoes to fill, but still, it fell flat. What we got in the end was an end to the trilogy that had me scratching my head thinking, was this even worth it, and what the hell did I just play? Alright, I shouldn't have to say this, but yeah, this video is going to include spoilers. I'll be talking about Little Nightmares 3 from the start to the finish, so if you haven't played it yet and still plan to, consider this your only warning. First, it's important to note that Little Nightmares 3 was developed by a new studio. After the first two games by Tarsier Studios, the series was handed off to Supermassive Games, known for Until Dawn and the Dark Pictures series. This to me felt like maybe it would have been a good handoff. Supermassive certainly stayed faithful to the Little Nightmares formula, but perhaps too faithful. The game feels overly safe and lacks its own personality from the rest. In other words, the new developers did not bring bold innovation or a fresh spark. Instead, they delivered a cautious copy of past ideas. The signature eerie art style and environmental storytelling are still somewhat present, but a lot of the time it has you thinking if you're playing a new title entirely. Coming from a franchise with such a passionate fan base, the expectations were definitely high, especially since we've been waiting for about 4 years for this game, and it was being hyped up like it would have been this masterpiece. Yet, I feel like this installment simply does not hit the same highs. In hindsight, the developer switch may have contributed to the game's identity crisis. It's as if Supermassive looked to replicate Little Nightmares 2 formula without fully grasping what made the original Little Nightmares series so special. One of the most immediately disappointing aspects of Little Nightmares 3 for me is how short the game is. Little Nightmares 3 only contains 4 chapters, whereas Little Nightmares 1 and 2 had 5 chapters each, with more substantial finale segments. I was like, oh, okay, I'm starting to understand this story a little bit more, and then boom, it was over. The whole game can be beaten in roughly 4 to 5 hours on a first playthrough, and like I was saying, the finale comes out of nowhere and offers very little payoff. In fact, the pacing feels off. Chapter 4 plays out like a penultimate chapter, building up to a final act, but then there is no Chapter 5. The game abruptly ends after this lackluster final boss, and then credits. This left me very unsatisfied. Important story elements felt rushed or cut short. For example, the final boss appears with essentially zero buildup or context, a total stranger to the whole plot, dropped in at the last minute. In the previous games, major antagonists were foreshadowed and developed. Take the lady in Little Nightmares 1 or the Thin Man in Little Nightmares 2. But here, apparently, the last boss's name is Otto, at least according to the Little Nightmares subreddit, and trust me, I'm a huge fan of these games, but man, some of you on that subreddit go deep into that lore. While reading through some of that stuff, I found out that a lot of key story details are apparently explained in the Sounds of Nightmares podcast. And look, I actually love when a franchise expands into other media. It shows passion and world building, but I think it's kind of ridiculous to hide important story elements in something most players will never hear or even know exists. Like, if you're gonna make a big moment or character like this Otto guy matter, that should at least be clear on a surface level in the game itself. It's fine to have extra lore for fans who want to dig deeper later, but expecting players to piece together major plot points through a podcast, maybe I'm just the idiot and everyone listens to this and knew that, but yeah, I didn't. Another major letdown is how Little Nightmares 3 handles, or rather ignores, the overarching series, story, and lore. Little Nightmares 2 ended on a huge, memorable twist and set up so many tantalizing questions. Six's betrayal, Mono's fate as the Thin Man, the broader world's mysteries. Instead, Little Nightmares 3 chooses to tell a completely separate tale, dropping the characters Six and Mono altogether. But maybe in the paid DLC we will get answers. But nonetheless, neither Six nor Mono appear in Little Nightmares 3. It's essentially a standalone story that takes place in a new setting called The Nowhere, with two entirely new protagonists, Lo and Alone. Even though I heard the game is a sequel to the first Little Nightmares. Basically what I'm trying to say is that when a game decides to be a prequel or a sequel, it usually loops back around to tie into the other entries. Something that connects the dots or adds context to what came before, but Little Nightmares 3 doesn't do that at all. There's no explanation, no bridge, nothing that links back to the previous games in a meaningful way. It's just like the story exists in a vacuum, completely ignoring everything that came before it. And that just feels off for a series, but that built its identity on mystery and connection. Now, I'm not completely knocking this game down. The story that Little Nightmares 3 does tell had potential. It follows Lo and his companion Alone through various nightmare realms, with hints that Lo is processing some kind of personal trauma. There's an interesting psychological angle here. However, the storytelling is lazy in execution. The big twist at the end in Little Nightmares 3 is that Alone was never real. She's an imaginary friend that Lo created to cope with loneliness and fear. Essentially, much of the game's events turns out to be in Lo's head, or a dream world manifestation of his mind. In my view, this comes dangerously close to the dreaded "it was all just a dream" trope. The revelation that Alone is imaginary is spelled out plainly by the end. This left no room for the kind of subtle interpretation that the series is known for. It renders a lot of what happened inconsequential. If all the monsters were just manifestations of Lo's mind and Alone wasn't even real, then nothing in the Nowhere truly mattered outside of Lo's personal growth, which itself isn't clearly conveyed. By the time the credits rolled, I had that sinking feeling of, so none of it actually happened? This cheapened the experience for me. Little Nightmares has always thrived on ambiguity and fan theories, but Little Nightmares 3 spoon feeds you answers in a very unsatisfying way. It's a far cry from the silent, nuanced storytelling that Tarsier executed so well. Lore connections to previous entries are basically non-existent. There are a few token Easter eggs here and there. You'll spot familiar faces like the gnomes, lanterns, and other callbacks to the first and second game, but that's all they are, just surface level callbacks. Little Nightmares 3 doesn't meaningfully tie into overarching worlds or advance it. One person on Reddit went as far as saying it felt more like a fan-made game or spin-off with no lore, which I agree completely. That might be harsh, but I understand the sentiment. After finishing Little Nightmares 3, I still had no clue how or if it fits into the bigger picture of Little Nightmares. Gameplay-wise, Little Nightmares has always been a linear puzzle platformer with some light exploration. That's expected, but Little Nightmares 3 feels even more linear than previous games. There's a notable lack of innovation in the gameplay design. It's largely the same hide-and-seek, push-to-crate, climb-here routine, only with less complexity. The puzzles were very limited in variety and often repeated basic concepts. In Little Nightmares 1 and 2, there were memorable puzzles, set pieces like the TV door puzzle in Little Nightmares 2 or the chef kitchen scenarios in Little Nightmares 1 that stuck with you. In Little Nightmares 3, I struggle to recall a single puzzle or predicament that really stood out to me. Yes, you occasionally do use Lo's bow, which is one of their utilities that they have, or Alone's wrench. They're the new character abilities for puzzles, but these don't fundamentally change the gameplay. They're just keys for specific locks, like shoot a target here or turn a lever there. Many sequences boil down to straightforward walk here, do this tasks, contributing to that walking simulator feeling. The lack of new ideas is perhaps the most frustrating part. Little Nightmares 3 doesn't raise the bar in any aspect of design, not in puzzles, not in platforming, not in interactivity. There's even reuse of certain assets and ideas that give a slight deja vu. Familiarity can breed nostalgia, but here it just made me think the older games did this better. I kept waiting for a clever puzzle or a new mechanic to shake things up, and it just never came. One new feature that could have been a game changer is the introduction of cooperative play. Little Nightmares 3 is the first in the series to allow two-player co-op. On paper, this sounded fantastic, exploring a creepy world with a friend, solving puzzles together. However, the way co-op was handled is stupid. For one, the game bizarrely offers no local co-op option. It's online only. This means two people in the same room can't play together on one system, which is a huge missed opportunity for a game that seems perfect for couch co-op. It's puzzling that the developers, having decided to focus on a duo of characters, wouldn't include a simple split screen or same screen co-op mode. But if you choose to play solo, you'll still have both characters present, with the second character controlled by AI. In my playthrough, the AI partner was actually quite competent. I was reading comments on Steam and Reddit itself that many people had issues with the AI not doing what it wanted it to do, but not in my playthrough. The computer-controlled friendly generally does what they're supposed to, you know? Sometimes, for me, in my situation, it even solved the puzzle before I even realized it. Which, some can say, is a double-edged sword, as it takes away the satisfaction of figuring out the puzzle yourself. I personally didn't experience any major issues with the AI. It kept up during chases, helped with puzzles. That being said, I bring this up as in Steam reviews, I read that many people complained about the AI being stupid and not functioning properly. Even putting the AI aside, the co-op doesn't fundamentally change the game in a meaningful way. Yes, two characters are present, but the puzzles and scenarios are still designed with essentially one brain in mind. The addition of a second player doesn't create new types of puzzles, it mostly just splits tasks. I also have to say that I personally found the co-op concept a bit at odds with the horror. Part of what made prior Little Nightmares games scary was the feeling of isolation, being a tiny child alone in a hostile world. By giving us a constant companion, some of that loneliness and vulnerability is inherently reduced. Now, this is subjective. Some might actually have preferred playing with a friend to ease the tension, but for me, the presence of a partner, even an AI one, made the experience less intense. I never truly felt alone or defenseless because my AI friend was immortal and always there. It's a trade-off. Co-op adds a new social element, but it does dilute the solitary horror from Little Nightmares. Little Nightmares 3 is a fascinating case of a sequel that had everything going for it. A beloved franchise, a talented new horror-focused studio, and a formula that had been wildly successful. Yet, it manages to miss the mark almost entirely. After playing through it, I felt like I had experienced an interesting idea that was executed in the most mediocre way possible. The game is by no means unplayable. It's still atmospheric, still has some moments of tension, but in the grand scheme of things, it still left me quite empty. The short length and abrupt ending made it feel like half a game. The story choices feel unambitious and unsatisfying. The horror elements are watered down. At times, Little Nightmares 3 doesn't even feel scary, which is a huge issue for a horror title, coming off as generic instead of original. The gameplay is linear and repetitive, offering little new to chew on. And the much-touted co-op feature, while functional, neither revolutionizes the gameplay nor honors what fans loved about the solitary creepiness of earlier entries. In many ways, I would call Little Nightmares 3 a step backwards for the series. Little Nightmares 2 was, in my opinion, the high point. It expanded the world, delivered iconic scares, and left us hungry for more. Little Nightmares 3, instead of building on that foundation, plays it safe and ultimately derails the momentum that Little Nightmares 2 built up. As a longtime fan, it genuinely pains me to give such a harsh assessment. I wanted to love this game, and I'll reiterate, it's not completely bad, but I have to be honest about how I felt when the credits rolled. I felt let down and even a bit annoyed. Little Nightmares 3 to me was a huge waste of potential. It's a decent horror light adventure on its own, but as a Little Nightmares entry, it's by far the weakest. It lacks the impact, the mystery, and the creativity that defined the series. In the end, I can only hope that if the series does continue, and with the DLCs on the way, maybe 6's story isn't completely dead. Perhaps they'll realize that fans crave that original blend of subtle storytelling, innovative scares, and meaningful progression of the lore. Little Nightmares 3 tried to recapture the magic without truly understanding it, and that's why it failed. It was interesting, yes, but not good enough. For now, at least we'll always have the first two masterpieces to remind us how magical our Little Nightmares can be.